Hello and welcome. I'm Darren. And today, before we even get into it, I'm going to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year because it seems like the polite thing to do. So, get that out of the way. Hopefully everyone got something nice for Christmas. I'm a bit too old now for that shit. So, unfortunately, the kids get nice stuff and I get socks. But regardless of that, today's topic is going to be a bit of an old one, something that won't go away. To be honest, I haven't been on YouTube, social media. I haven't been greatly active lately because it all got, I'm going to be honest, it got a bit boring. And as far as repeating the same content or going down a line that I refuse to go down, realistically, for me personally, I got quite involved in my sim racing, and sim racing content, certainly from my part, is not content that people appear to be that interested in. And I don't really want to make content that I don't want to make. And I don't want to repeat the same thing on a daily basis. And I don't want to go down the route of talking shit against a brand that isn't a brand that I've attached myself to. So, the reason is I don't really attach myself to a brand. I just generally use either A, what's easier for me to obtain, or B, effectively something that I like. That doesn't mean I hold it to the being the best standard. I just hold it to whatever suits me best. So, on that bombshell, we're going to get into today's topic, which is the never-ending argument of the RTX 4080 versus the 7900 XTX. Now, obviously, I've been running both of those now for quite some time. The 4080 I bought probably not far after launch. The XTX I haven't been running as long, but I've probably got a good, I'd say 6 months, but I reckon it could be longer than that. I really haven't kept a tab on it. I think it'd be at least 6 months. I've definitely, I'm running, there's not really a day that goes by when I'm not running one or the other, and the XTX for this moment in time is attached to my sim racing rig, so I'm probably actually, for the last couple of months, I've been using that more than the 4080. The 4080 at the moment is what I'm recording on now. It's sat at my desk within the lounge, so games like Black Myth Wukong or something like that. Admittedly, now I did play the Black Myth Wukong on the XTX after I got through some initial issues, and then I kind of finished it on the 4080 once I'd decided that the XTX would move over to the sim racing rig. And there's obviously reasons for that, which we will go into. But to get to the point and to drop most of the bullshit talk out of the way, which GPU is the best? And I'm going to say neither or both. And what that means is the GPU that is the best out of the 4080 or the 7900 XTX is the one that suits your individual needs and wants the most. And that is as honest as I can be. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not one that's best for me. Obviously, because I have certain needs and I have certain wants. Now, probably to get most of it out the way, I am running, or I have been running, generally when I put these GPUs side by side, they are connected to a 4K monitor. So I want to get that out of the way. Obviously, this is a 4K monitor. I'm running on a 27-inch 4K monitor. I'm not running on a TV. So obviously, when you're running on a dedicated PC hardware monitor, you have nothing else to display a signal other than what the GPU is supplying it. So I'm not running a TV. I can only give you the feedback that I've had through running this through a monitor. I know a lot of people might be using these GPUs on a 4K television. Whether that causes any type of issues with any type of TV already built-in upscaling image changing hardware, I honestly don't know. I'm using dedicated monitor. A monitor does not display any type of image. It has nothing else in between. Your monitor is displaying the image that's fed by the graphics card. So I'll get that out of the way. And that is probably, obviously, where I'm going to be talking with these GPUs. Now, not everybody buying these GPUs will be running them at 4K, which I completely understand. I have run them both also at ultra-wide 1440p, so 3440 by 1440p. I ran those for probably a fair bit. I did a fair bit of testing at that resolution. That resolution obviously isn't 1440p. It is more expensive than 1440p to run in terms of obviously raw power. It generally falls somewhere between 1440p and 4K. But yeah, so my advice. Here we go. 4K. Obviously, if this is what we're talking, well, no, let's put it this way. The first thing that you need to decide is, obviously, which resolution you want to use. So obviously, these GPUs are at the highest end. Obviously, there is higher on the Nvidia stack, being the 4090, and then on the AMD stack, this is the highest you're going to get. So probably you can say straight away the biggest difference between them both is the VRAM. So 4080 Super, 16 gigabytes, and the 7900 XGX does have that 24 gigabytes of VRAM. Has it been a problem for me? No. The first time it became a problem for me, obviously the XTX is just not going to be a problem on VRAM. And when we're going through this, we're going to go through probably a lot of the arguments, what you read online, a lot of the stuff that will be said. I mean, obviously, if you want to go to Hardware Unboxed, they've covered the VRAM topic plenty of times, but we're going to go into it again because I still see some comments on people that don't make a lot of sense to me. Well, they do. They kind of make sense to me if they're in that I hate Nvidia and I will try and swing an argument in a way that doesn't make sense, but I don't care because I can just say it. And that's the VRAM argument. So probably the first VRAM argument that you will read, and you will read it everywhere, is my card will last longer because it has more VRAM. And there's different ways to dissect that argument. Now, probably the biggest problem is the GPUs with the highest amount of VRAM are the most powerful GPUs. Those GPUs will last longer because they are more powerful than any of the GPUs below them. If they're already ahead, then they will stay ahead. They are not staying ahead because they have more VRAM unless suddenly more VRAM is suddenly introduced into games, which up until this point is a very rare occurrence. And there's proof of this, and the proof of this is in the 24 gigabyte VRAM GPUs that have already existed. Now, those 24 gigabyte VRAM GPUs that have already existed are now beaten by 12 gigabyte VRAM GPUs on a daily basis. But the 24 gigabyte VRAM GPUs from the last generation are still held up quite well, not down to the VRAM allocation, but down to the fact that they were the most powerful VRAM, or they were the most powerful GPUs in that current time, which is pretty obvious that when you get into the next generation, they will still be relevant, whereas the slowest GPUs of the last generation are really going to struggle. It's not down to how much VRAM that those had. People have to take into account that if two 4090 versions existed, if we had a 12 gigabyte 4090 and we had a 24 gigabyte 4090 and we were playing a game like a lot of UE5 titles that have released this year, that only use 8 gigabytes, those GPUs will have the same amount of power. They will both produce, for instance, 100 FPS at 4K native. There will be no difference because VRAM hasn't come into the equation. The 24 gigabytes 4090 versus the 12 gigabyte 4090, that didn't make any difference. It made no difference. The only time VRAM matters is when you run out of VRAM. And when you run out of VRAM, it matters. But how much does it matter? And that's the next argument. Because VRAM is generally, you're going to be using VRAM for A, resolution, and B, for textures. That's pretty much where most of your VRAM is going to go. So if, like me, you are playing at 4K, you will know. And if you don't know, this is something that you need to look into before you go shopping for a GPU. If you're wanting to play at 4K, then you need the most VRAM available. Now, that doesn't mean you need as much as 24 gigabytes, but I'm not going to sit here and lie to anyone and say 16 gigabytes is going to be perfectly fine, because that would be a lie. I have run into, if you watch the last video that I put up, which was the Indiana Jones video. Now, in that video, by using 4K at the highest texture pool that was available, with path tracing and with frame generation enabled, that went over the 16 gigabytes allocation. Now, that, I believe, so far is a first. Is that going to be a new trend? Who knows? It's very hard to say. Is that just an optimization thing? Is that a game getting released towards the end of a generation and making kind of grounds towards the next generation of GPUs? I don't know. That would probably be a bit of a hard one to answer, because when you look at what's launching next for AMD, they're not launching a GPU next generation that goes, well, by rumors, they're not launching a GPU that goes above 16 gigabytes of VRAM. So that's interesting. As far as Nvidia goes, that's a very awkward situation as well, because as far as we can see into the future, or if we go by the rumors, you're going to have, I think it's probably pretty much nailed on at this moment in time that a 5090 is going to have 32 gigabytes of VRAM, which is crazy. Now, the biggest problem is the GPU below that, which is rumored to be the 5080, will have 16 gigabytes of VRAM. I can already tell you from running the 7900 XTX and the 4080 throughout this generation that AMD hasn't changed my mind over Nvidia. It's a great GPU. I haven't. There's not many places that I can fault the 7900 XTX, but it hasn't made me change my mind on my preference towards Nvidia. We'll get further into that, but that leads me into a 5080 situation with 16 gigabytes. Am I happy about that? No. Will I buy it? Honestly, at this moment in time, with what I know, I will probably wait. I do believe that there will be something that will fall in between the 5080 and the 5090 by their current rumors, because there is too big a gap between both of those GPUs. So I will probably wait. I don't need or particularly want a 24 gigabyte VRAM GPU, because what I'm talking about now is just purely for gaming. People need to realize that GPUs are used more than just for gaming, but we are talking about just for gaming. So obviously these VRAM allocations, certainly around the 24 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, people can argue those are for people that want to do heavy modding in games, and that's totally fine. If people want to do that, those people know, or they should know. If you want to heavily mod a game, add tons of mods, you will need VRAM to do it. And I'd hope that those people, before they even look into it, understand that, because they will need to obviously make allowances for that. But as far as it goes, certainly in my mind, the 24 gigabytes of VRAM that was added to the 3090, the 4090, the 7900 XTX, those are all taking into account people that are using their GPUs for workflow as well. Now, I'm not saying that it's of no use to gamers, but I don't believe that that VRAM allocation has been added purely for gaming, because games aren't using that much. They're not really getting anywhere near that. But I have seen the 16 gigabyte VRAM breached, and I do play at 4K. I don't have a crystal ball. Whether that's going to be a trend, I don't know. Obviously, the next generation of consoles will probably decide. If the next generation of consoles stay where they are, then 16 gigabytes is probably going to be safe for a lot further into the future. If the next generation of consoles goes above that, then that'll be different, because the consoles are designed to display to 4K. They are they're designed to be plugged into a TV in your lounge, a 4K, and most people are running obviously 4K displays. So that's what they're designed at, and they have the memory allocation to allow 4K textures. So the one thing is, obviously, games are then made to run on console, and then obviously it then transfers to PC. So you have to take into, obviously, consideration the consoles. Now, hopefully that kind of explains most of what we're going to talk about, or hopefully that gets the VRAM thing out, because it's kind of a constant argument. AMD, in credit to them, give you enough VRAM. Obviously, the argument is why Nvidia don't give you enough VRAM. A lot of people will argue that Nvidia are being tight. I find that a stupid argument, because you can't argue that Nvidia are the expensive brand when you say they're being tight. At the end of the day, VRAM's not that much. It isn't that expensive. Nvidia could put extra VRAM on every GPU, charge you an extra 50 quid throughout the stack on top of the existing price, and they wouldn't care. Because if the argument is they don't care, they just charge you stupid amounts of money, why wouldn't they add some more VRAM and just charge you an extra 50 quid? Now, in my mind, I'd probably say, for what makes sense to me, is that Nvidia design or have an idea of a stack of GPUs in their mind set to run at set resolutions. So yeah, I don't think they want you buying a 4060 to run 4K at whatever. Then they're just not going to give you the VRAM allocation for that. But I believe they design a product stack to run at a certain resolution, and I'm pretty sure that they run it around a set TDP, so a set power budget. And obviously, the higher amount of VRAM that you add to a GPU, the bigger memory bus you need for a GPU. Obviously, all of these VRAM modules need power. So the more VRAM that you add to a GPU, the higher the TDP goes up. And before you know it, if we had every single GPU across the stack was a 24 gigabyte GPU, every GPU would be the size of a 4090, and it would be pulling 400 watts. And that is not what they want, and it's not what a lot of people want, because VRAM isn't important to everyone, or it isn't as important to everyone. There are a lot of people that play games with the lowest settings possible to run at the highest FPS possible. There are people that run 4090s at 1080p low to get 400 or 500 FPS. That's how they want to play. Not everybody wants to run 60 FPS and have the game fully cranked to ultra textures, path tracing, everything else enabled, everything that sucks VRAM. Not everybody wants to play like that. I want to play like that, but I have to understand that's not how everyone wants to play. So different people have different uses, and this is exactly what we're saying. Not one, and that's why I'm kind of saying that you can't say AMD's better for you because it's better for you. Or sorry, I can't tell someone that AMD is better, for everyone, when that's not the case. Or Nvidia is better for everyone when that's not the case, because everyone has a different want and different need. So as far as VRAM goes, that's kind of about as far as I want to go into that. I will probably personally, at 4K myself, I'm not in a rush to upgrade. And I will probably wait and see how it goes, because I think if there's a lot of backlash with the 5080 launch, I think we will probably see a 24 gigabyte 5080 come sooner. Now, the only reason that might get held up is I'm not sure where we are in this happening at the moment, but I believe when the 3 gigabyte, which is always touted as something that will happen, and it's always failed. But if we get the 3 gigabyte memory modules, I believe we will see more VRAM on Nvidia GPUs, because in doing so, with the 3 gigabyte VRAM modules, Nvidia will be able to keep the smaller memory bus and keep the smaller TDP, because effectively they will be able to add more VRAM by having 3 gigabyte modules versus the 2 gigabyte modules. And I think that will give us more of an indication on whether Nvidia are doing it because they are being tight and they're intentionally screwing people, or if they've been doing it because they've been waiting for the 3 gigabyte VRAM modules so that they can run lower TDP cards with a higher VRAM allocation. That will be kind of probably proof in the pudding. On the separate note, and probably another reason why I'm doing this video, because obviously there is a new technology which is being talked about, which is why the AMD hate on Nvidia is coming probably around again, because generally whenever Nvidia bring out a new tech, it gets a huge amount of backlash from the AMD community. So that is the neural, whatever it's called. That's how bad I am at actually taking notice of it. There's obviously some kind of neural, I can't remember, neural something, which obviously Nvidia are bringing, or apparently advertising, with the 50 series. Now, this has been spoken about. Daniel Owen's done a video on it. Go and check that out. I don't think at this moment in time anyone has any exact how this is going to work. Now, if this is going to reduce how much VRAM a Nvidia GPU uses compared to what they're already using at the moment, obviously it will change how much they use compared to AMD at the moment. Whether this is designed to do that, we will have to see how that works, and then we can probably make a more informed decision. We're not going to write it off at this moment in time and say it's useless or it's trash, even though that is being said. And we're not going to praise it and say it's great, because we will have to wait and see how it goes. Now, with a lot of stuff like this, new technologies, how we expect it to be when it releases, who knows? Hopefully, if it's not that great when it releases, it's something that will improve. If it's not, it's something that will just get discounted and thrown under a bus. From what I've seen on it, from what I watched on Daniel Owen's video, I could probably take it 2 ways. It's either being used to lower the amount of VRAM that we're already using. By how much that will be, I don't know. I don't expect it to suddenly half. So I don't expect suddenly, playing 4K Ultra, let's say, using 12 gigabytes of VRAM to do so. I don't think that's suddenly going to go to 6 gigabytes of VRAM. So how that will work, I don't know. If it's not made to reduce VRAM usage, it might be made, or it might be in use of allowing higher textures than what we already have available. And the reason I'd say that is, if you're running something like a 24 gigabyte 4090 and a game demands 24 gigabytes of textures, I don't believe a 4090 in a gaming environment at a high frame rate would be able to unpack 24 gigabytes of textures. I don't think that would happen. I think you'd have the worst pop-in you would ever have seen. Now, at a low frame rate, I'm sure you could probably unpack 24 gigabytes of textures at 30 FPS maybe, and it wouldn't be too bad. But obviously, the higher your frame rate goes up, I think that would obviously cause a problem. Now, whether this negates that and allows for a lot higher textures to be loaded into games a lot faster, I don't know. Again, we'll have to wait and see. Maybe it will do somewhat between the both of those two ideas. I don't know. Again, we'll wait and see. But then obviously let's get past VRAM because it's fucking annoying, to be honest. And let's get into the next thing. Now, the next thing, and probably the biggest thing, is, well, certainly in my mind, the upscalers. And I'm going to talk about that probably more so because we're at 4K. Now, if you're at 1440p, or if you're against upscalers, then this is not an argument for you. Because what I will say, if you can buy the XTX at a decent discounted price, that actually means something to you. So if there's only £50 between the both, say you can get an XTX for 950 and the 4080 is £1,000. If that doesn't matter that much to you, then the reasons to actually buy one over the other are gonna. It will probably come down to a lot of preferable, a lot of personal taste. But effectively, with Nvidia, if you are paying more for it, then you are paying more so for the features. If you refuse to use those features, people will still say they will not use upscalers. Well, that is perfectly fine. People get to play with, use their hardware, play games however they want. That's fine. I would say at that point, if you are buying a 4080 or a 7900 XTX and you refuse to use upscalers, or I'm not saying you refuse to, you don't want to, that's fine. I'd probably say that you're not playing 4K. Because if you are playing 4K, effectively you're going to be reducing a lot. You're certainly not playing 4K high. You could probably get away with 4K medium. At that point, you're paying for a 24 gigabyte 400 watt 7900 XTX to play 4K medium. You probably shouldn't be buying that GPU. But hey, if that's what you want to do, that's totally fine. So if you're not against using new tech, then Nvidia is, in my mind, definitely the more GPU to consider for that reason. DLSS is just better. DLSS has been around a lot longer. DLSS has been messed around with, or should I say upgraded a lot more. That's fine. It's also available in most games at launch. As someone that's obviously playing at 4K, I'm using both myself. So I'm using DLSS a lot. I'm using FSR not as much. The reason is because FSR just doesn't look that good. And the annoying thing is, when you're at 4K, you don't play at 4K unless visual quality is something that you're interested in. That's just pointless. You wouldn't obviously take the performance loss that you take at 4K if you didn't care about visuals. So if you're playing at 4K, it's because you care about visuals. And if you care about visuals, unfortunately, when you're using FSR, for most of the time, this isn't 100%, and it's not 100% with DLSS. But in saying that, I don't even know. I reckon it would be 1 in 20 games where DLSS hasn't been that great. And with AMD, I'd probably say 7 out of 10 games, it's not good. And it led me into probably the last couple of games. So if we look at the XTX and the 4080 performance at 4K native, in a lot of modern games, they are generally around 45 FPS. Give or take 5 FPS here or there, but they are generally around 45 FPS. most games at 4K maxed out seem to be centered around 60 FPS for the 4090, and anything below that is obviously the drop off. So the XTX and the 4080 being two cards that obviously perform quite similar to each other. So they're generally around 45 FPS, 4K, native, everything else cranked high. Now, with the 4080, I am generally, or pretty much 99% of the time, I can't actually off the top of my head think of any of the new games where I couldn't just put DLSS on, DLSS was available, throw it on, and that will instantly take you to 60, 65. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it'll take you to somewhere between 60 and 70. And it will, to me, still look very good. I don't very often see any difference between 4K native and DLSS. Now, I'm sure if I was in a situation where I could display them both side by side and run the game looking at one screen native and one with DLSS set to quality, I might notice some differences. But you're never going to do that. So for me, I just set it to DLSS quality. It gives me the performance I need. I can then obviously throw frame generation on to bump up any more if I want, or I can make other changes. But generally, I can throw on DLSS quality. Now, for a lot of the time at 4K, I can actually throw on DLSS balanced, and it will still look very good. If anything, it might soften the image a bit. If there's a sharpening bar enabled, if I wanted to resharpen it, I probably could. It doesn't generally start to add any type of bad aliasing, whereas with FSR it does. And that kind of led me to a couple of games probably this generation, Black Myth Wukong and The First Descendant. Now, both of those games I played close to launch, and with the XTX, because of FSR in both of those games, not looking very good. And I don't think XeSS really helped those games either. TSR generally doesn't look that great. So both of those games, I actually opted to then start lowering game settings. So I believe I ended up at a mixture of probably high and medium over certain things to get me to a certain performance that I needed. So to get me above the 60 FPS. Whereas with the Nvidia GPU, I was just able to use DLSS and it still looked great. And if anything, it probably still, well, obviously it was at Ultra, and the DLSS actually fixed the anti-aliasing that wasn't very good in those games at native. So unfortunately, that left me in a situation where I was getting a higher frame rate with the 4080 and it looked considerably better. And that's kind of where that GPU has left me this generation. Now, there are obviously a couple of other things. I'll have to discount them. They're not particularly something that I'll use. Fluid motion frames is obviously something that you have available all the time to you on the XTX. I don't use it. I don't really like it. I think I used it in one game where I kind of probably thought it looked all right. I know some people like to use it, and that's perfectly fine. I wouldn't add it as a feature worth buying a AMD GPU for personally. I don't see it has enough value. So at the moment, I'd say DLSS over FSR adds a value. I would pay extra. If both GPUs were at the exact same price, I would pay extra for DLSS. Ray tracing performance, everyone's going to know that. You don't need me to tell you that. Obviously, Nvidia has been in the RT game for a lot longer. Nvidia has far superior RT performance. Is it something that makes me buy a Nvidia GPU? Not really. It's nice to have that option, so I'd say maybe there is a little bit in my mind that makes me think that. Obviously, like I said, I was actually able to play with path tracing on the Indiana Jones game. I just had to knock the texture pool down a small amount, and then that was enough to, because obviously the VRAM was the limiting factor there. So that enabled me to obviously use path tracing. RT can be a little bit hit and miss, and the reason that RT can be a little bit hit and miss is sometimes there aren't enough settings that allow you to use what you want and what you don't want. Indiana Jones probably did a good thing there, where they allowed you to turn on certain things and turn certain things off. So you don't always have to run everything fully cranked ultra to make it viable. And that's probably the same with the VRAM when we were talking about VRAM. You don't have to always play ultra or ultra plus or anything that's above ultra, so ultra plus plus. Those are things that people tend to tell you that you need to do to try and justify the GPU that you have. You don't have to listen to people. You can do whatever the fuck you want. Personally, at 4K, I very much struggle, very much like I was saying about the DLSS quality, I very much struggle sometimes to see a difference between high and ultra. And sometimes there's even an ultra plus thrown in there, and I struggle to see the difference in that. Now, again, if I was running side-by-side screens, you might see the difference. If I flick between the two and I don't really see the difference, then effectively I'm not missing anything. If the game still looked good, go with it. So that's kind of as far as it goes. RT, yes, it's available. Do I buy a Nvidia GPU for its RT performance? No. I'd probably, if you really cared about RT, then you really care about visuals. So if you really care about visuals, in my mind, you're going for 4K. You're going for 4K high settings, and then ray tracing is what you add on after to give you that extra, the extra thing that nothing else can do. So if I really, really cared about ray tracing, I would buy the 4090. In saying that, I run Cyberpunk with obviously ray tracing. Generally, if it's available and it's a game that really does make use of it, I will run ray tracing. I did actually play. I'm in the middle of playing The Witcher 3 at the moment, and that game I did notice. I don't know if it was just in a certain scenario, but I did turn off RT the other day, just to actually see how much of an impact it made. And in the area where I was at, it actually made quite a big difference. I wouldn't want to run that game without RT. So at the same time, the XTX does well on that with RT as well, because the XTX actually has quite a big advantage in that game when you're talking just raster versus raster. So RT's kind of each to their own on that one. Other than that, drivers have probably not been bad for either of them. As far as, I think I've only really suffered with two whilst I've been running, three games. No, in fact, I think one of them I'm not going to blame on the AMD. I'm going to blame it on my Moser. I think it was actually my Moser software that might have been causing the problem. It's fixed now. I did have a problem with Le Mans Ultimate crashing, but I think that might have been down to my Moser software. Helldivers 2 was crashing on the XGX, and Black Myth Wukong was crashing on the XGX. As far as it goes, the 4080, I haven't had crashing. If I had, I'd be completely honest with it. As far as smoothness, I'd probably say smoothness I would put slightly in favour of AMD in a few games. But again, very dependent on the games. The one thing that I have noticed is moving to AMD, I'm now getting stutters quite bad on... Probably my worst game for stuttering is actually ACC, which is a little bit annoying. That is on the AMD. As far as some games go, I think The Witcher 3 I'm playing at the moment, I've played quite long into it now, and that's running pretty smooth now. And the Nvidia is quite stuttery at first. Not bad, kind of small stutters. AMD was a lot less small stutters. Every now and then it had a really big one where I thought it was going to crash. But the longer I played into it, the smoother the 4080 seemed to get. So it's, as far as that goes, it's very hit and miss. I'd probably be hard pushed on that subject to say which one's worse. The other thing is I am running the 4080 on a 13700K, and I'm running the XTX on a 7800X 3D, so they're not running the same CPU. So I wouldn't want to go too far into that. That might also have been a reason why I had a couple of crashes on the AMD system, so I don't want to say that's purely down to the 7900 XTX. But as far as it goes, that's probably where I'd say these two GPUs come head to head. If you don't care about upscalers and you don't care about RT performance and the price is right on the 7900 XTX, it is a very good GPU. If you care about those features, or you think that you might need those features, and if you're gaming at 4K, I'm kind of telling you, or I'm warning you, you probably will need those features of the upscaler. Then the upscaler is going to help you a lot more on the 4080 with having DLSS. The only problem you then have is, will 16 gigabytes hold you through? And that I do not have a crystal ball, unfortunately. So that's down to you. I've been fine from it this generation until that one game. Who knows what the future holds. At the moment, UE5 seems, or most of the Unreal Engine 5 games seem to be a long way off running your 16 gigabytes of textures out, so those should probably be safe for now. But obviously you have to bear in mind frame generation and all the rest of it, and then whatever happens with this Nvidia neural texture whatever memory, I can't remember what they called it, I just remember it being called something neural. Now how that comes into play next generation, will that work on 4000 series? Who knows? That might only be a tech that has some sort of hardware, or Nvidia might just choose to lock it in. Who knows? That might only work on 50 series, so we're going to have to wait and see on that. But as far as it goes at the moment, I would say these are two very good GPUs. I personally, if they were both the same price, I would certainly, personally, for me, for my use, I would certainly buy the 4080. Not that the 7900 XTX is a bad GPU. It's a very good GPU. But I do use the upscaler. I can't say... I just can't deny it. I just use DLSS a lot. At 4K, DLSS set to quality just looks so good. There's just a time when I don't use it. Even if I don't need it, I will use it, because for me it is always going to be free performance. Unfortunately, with the AMD GPU, that is definitely not the case. I'm not going to say it's always bad. There have been a few FSR3 games that actually look quite good, and in those circumstances, no problem. AMD actual frame generation is very good. I don't find it as good on mouse and keyboard, but it works very well on controller, so that's all good. As far as drivers goes, I don't really have a problem with drivers on either. And like I said, as far as stuttering goes, it's kind of, you do get a bit of stuttering with both. Sometimes it's both on the same games, sometimes it's on different games, and there's generally different reasons for both. Now, I do find probably on both times, playing the game for longer generally tends to smooth that out. The only problem that I do have is that doesn't seem to be working with me on ACC. I need to probably look it into a bit further, because it is, that one's quite bad, because they are quite big stutters, like to the point of it hitches every now and then. I need to look further into that. The one thing that I did notice is it was very similar on Nvidia. Not in ACC, I believe it was on the EA Rally game. That one stuttered in a similar way to what the XTX does on ACC. So that was a bit of a shame. And I didn't play it for very long. So whether that one, once you played for longer on that GPU, sorted that out or not. A lot of the time you're still loading shaders. Obviously some games will load a shader cache or preload. some games it will do it, but not for very long, so it's still actually loading shaders as you're kind of unlocking the game visually. It is still going to load shaders, and you'll generally find once you've gone through an area, if it did stutter quite badly, once you've gone through the area, if you then go back through it a second time, that's generally gone away. If you go past it through it a third time, it's completely gone. So it's different ways they work it. It's not always a big problem. I don't particularly find it a huge problem. So it's not something that I'm going to make a big deal out of. Like I said, for me, realistically, the biggest thing is DLSS. And then obviously you can throw in a bit of RT performance. And then that comes down to each individual, and if that is of importance to them, and if it's how much extra they're willing to pay for that. For me, there was about £50 between both GPUs, so it wasn't a big deal. I will happily pay that £50 again. If I only had the choice to buy one of them, I would be buying the 4080, and I'd happily pay that extra £50 for the DLSS, for that little extra bit of RT performance. Like I said, so far the VRAM hasn't been an issue for me. The only game that has been is on the Indiana Jones game, and I wouldn't be able to, with the XTX, I don't think I'd be able to play path tracing with that. So it's not like I could compare the both of them next to each other in that game, because I don't think the AMD GPU would even be able to do the path tracing. So and that is the only reason why the 4080 went above the 16 gigabytes allocation. So that's it. That's been a very long video. I haven't done one for a long time. Probably spoke a load of trash. I don't have anything pre-recorded, but there we go. That's my thoughts on running both of them over the year. If this has helped anyone, happy days. Give me a like, and I will catch you in the next one.